Will Midreg.
Okay. We're in public, just wait. Okay.
Yeah. We're in public session. I first have to deal with two items of EU communications. Schedule B. The committee has been notified of communications regarding two legislative proposals by the European Union. Both of these are being considered as Schedule B proposals. Their COM 2018-717 is a proposal to amend Annexes 2 and 3 of the Agreement on the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Waterboards AEWA, administered by the United Nations Environment Programme, to which Ireland is a contracting party. Is it agreed that no further scrutiny is required?
Yes.
Agreed. The second one is COM 2018-731. It's a proposal regarding the position to be adopted by the EU on the proposals to amend Appendices 2 and 3 of the Berne Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitat. Is it agreed that no further scrutiny is required? Agreed. Now for the main item of business today, or the central one, is the National Famine Commemoration Day Bill, which provides for the commemoration of the Great Famine, to provide for the establishment of the National Famine Commemoration Day and to provide for related matters. It's a private members' bill sponsored by Deputy Colin Brophy and was referred to this committee by the Dáil in 2017. Our meeting on the 14th of November last, the committee decided to conduct a detailed scrutiny of the bill in accordance with the guidelines, and today we commence that scrutiny. And to assist us in this matter, I am pleased to welcome Mr Colin Brophy, TD, representing the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, Conor Falvey, Assistant Secretary, and John Healy, accompanied by Professor Tommy Cook, who is a member of the National Famine Commemoration Committee. Also, Mr Michael Blanche, accompanied by Ms Olivia Blanche. So does I mean Lenar Venisha, Bawallam, Akor. Okay, yeah. Akor Verard, Gowil, the Vua Al Chakta, Do Eld, and Oct Cluvilla, Comil is the Nui, Fina Hefri Cussant, Eglan Privilege, Mother Lesson Finisha, Hogan, Sheet, and Custa Shaw. So I'm asked, before you address the meeting, I want to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that the opening statement and any other documents you have submitted to the committee may be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of this long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Just I want to remind people who are witnesses or in the gallery to switch off their phones. It interferes with the recording material here, so if you haven't done so thus far, could you please do it. So our due spara Cormay Tugum the Colin Brophy on Billa Harrington, who's Lartling and Show.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and I would like to obviously particularly thank you for, since you became Chair, the speedy way you have brought this to the committee. I appreciate the opportunity just to outline what at the heart is a very simple proposal to put in place a bill which would put in place a fixed date for commemoration of the famine. The main proponent, or the main processes involved in it, and there's literally only 2 or 3 of them, that we would have a commemoration day which would occur on the 2nd Sunday of May, that the commemoration would include civil and military and ceremonial elements and an interfaith service. There would be a central venue for commemoration which would be designated by the Taoiseach of the government, and they're at the heart of it, the proposals within the bill. The reason I'm bringing this forward is really to put a definitive date into the calendar and a definitive structure around the commemoration. I do appreciate and acknowledge in advance that in recent years there has been a lot of work done by the National Famine Commemoration Committee, and there have been some very excellent events marking famine commemoration. But we have had a situation over a period of time where we have had no real certainty as to the date. It has moved around the calendar, it has moved around the time of year, it has moved from the earlier part of the year, sometimes to the autumn part of the year. And I think, and it's the reason that's really driven this with me, is that for something that is so central to the history of our country, that is absolutely, I believe, should be part of what makes us Irish and what actually really had such impact in creating the country and the island in which we live, that we should treat this with the respect it deserves. And part of that respect is to have that fixed date. The other thing I believe fully in terms of what the bill would achieve is by having a fixed date, it would enable the development of a much greater process around the commemoration. It would enable particularly our schools to work to a date and to work to a certainty of a date in terms of developing programmes that would bring in a greater educational involvement for children in our country. So it is, as I say, it's a very, very simple bill. It's a very, very simple proposal. I do recognise in advance, in terms of conversations I've had on it, that there are certain aspects of it which, for logistical reasons, I suppose would be the best way of phrasing it, could be tightened up or amended, and I am open, obviously, to consideration of that. So that really concludes my opening remarks on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Cúr mágat agus inis agus onadha on Ryan cultúr Oireachtas agus Gaeltacht made ha ra cocha chor in our láthar ní liscum ceocha talk on Lart. I don't know which of the 3 you're going to address. Conor.
Thank you, Ciarán, and thank you, members of the committee and the other guests, and just to wish Ciarán well in his new role. To start, my name is Conor Falvey. I'm an Assistant Secretary in charge of Corporate Affairs in the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht. I'm accompanied by my colleague John Healy, who's the head of our Corporate Governance Unit, which, among other things, provides Secretariat support to the National Famine Commemoration Committee, chaired by the Minister. Also in attendance is Professor Tommy Cook, a long-standing member of the National Famine Commemoration Committee. On behalf of the Minister, I would like to thank the committee for their interest in this matter and for the opportunity to present the Department's views in relation to this bill today. As the committee will be aware, the National Famine Commemoration Committee was initiated in 2008 following a government decision to commemorate the Great Famine with an annual Memorial Day. The National Famine Commemoration Committee is chaired by the then Minister for Community, Rural and Gaeltacht Affairs, Éamon Ó Cuív, and was established to consider the most appropriate arrangements for an annual national commemoration of the Great Famine. The commemoration, which broadly speaking follows the format of the National Day of Commemoration established by the Government in 1985, is part of the State's annual programme of commemorations, which includes the 1916 Easter Rising commemoration, which is held on Easter Sunday, the annual 1916 Arbour Hill commemoration, which is not on a fixed date but takes place between the dates of the first and last execution of the leaders, usually on the first Wednesday after May the 3rd. The Daniel O'Connell commemoration is also held in Glasnevin Cemetery on the 2nd Sunday of each May, the Sunday closest to his death. The National Famine commemoration is to be held on the 3rd Sunday of May or its eve, I might come back to that in a moment, by the government decision of 2018. And the National Day of Commemoration, which is held on the Sunday closest to the 11th of July, the anniversary of the signing of the truce in 1921 for the War of Independence. There is also an annual commemoration of the Psalm organised by the Royal British Legion ROI branch and is held in the Irish National War Memorial Gardens Island Bridge on the Sunday preceding the National Day of Commemoration. At present, each of these commemorations is undertaken on the basis of a government decision and none are provided for in legislation. To date, no government has considered it necessary to propose the introduction of legislation in respect of state ceremonial events of this nature. Since the adoption of the current format in 2009, the National Famine Commemoration has retained a high degree of continuity in its format. However, the artistic, cultural and other elements of the commemoration can and do vary from year to year at the behest of the local community and the local organisers. From an early date, May has been identified as a preferred month for the holding of the commemoration due to the second Sunday in May being noted as Famine Sunday in many areas and the likelihood of good weather. However, it should also be noted that there is no specific date associated with the beginning, nadir or end of the famine, and also that there are famine walks and commemorations in many communities on dates of local significance. The commemoration has been held during May on 6 occasions since 2009. It has also been necessary to hold the commemoration in September and October to accommodate the local community or due to other pressures such as the availability of the Taoiseach or President. A key consideration in all years has been to ensure that the commemoration is held during school term to facilitate the involvement in schools, and the Deputy has referred to that as relevant. However, at the request of the Minister for Culture and Heritage to Gaeltacht, the Government on the 30th of April 2018 agreed to the designation of the third Sunday of May as the National Famine Commemoration Day, with the arrangements for the holding of a state commemoration that is commensurate with the Great Famine's historical, social and cultural significance on this day or the preceding Saturday, to be decided each year by the Minister for Culture and Heritage to Gaeltacht following consultation with the local relevant authority and host community. The reason being obviously that there are some host communities who may not prefer to host an event on a Sunday. As a result of this decision, the 2019 commemoration will be held on the weekend of the 18th or 19th of May next year at a Connacht venue. This decision has given effect to one of the primary objectives of the bill, the identification of a fixed date, while preserving a degree of flexibility to vary the day of the ceremony to Saturday in recognition of local community concerns, as was the case for the 2015 commemoration held in Newry. The National Famine Commemoration is unique among state commemorations in that the venue changes from year to year. The ceremony programme comprises two parts, the first of which is a community event organised by the host community and local authority with support from the department staff, which culminates in the keynote speech by the presiding officer, usually the President or the Taoiseach. This is followed by the formal state ceremonial event, which includes military honours and wreath-laying ceremonies. The community programme generally includes readings in the Irish and English languages, music by local musicians and choirs, participations by local school children, and prayers for the victims of the famine, led by representatives of various faiths, and a humanist reflection. The precise form of each element of the programme may vary from year to year, but is always subject to approval by the Minister to preserve the dignity of the event. As I have already stated, while the Minister welcomes the interest and intention of the Deputy in bringing forward this bill, she is appreciative of the concerns of the National Famine Commemoration Committee that the enactment of the legislation could lead to a number of unintended consequences which may unintentionally hamper the ability of communities to host a National Famine Commemoration in future years. And this issue of there being local host communities to host a national commemoration every year has been an important element on the basis of the impact of the famine being felt in all corners of the country. These concerns primarily arise in relation to the proposals that the commemoration should include military ceremonial events and an interfaith service. As the members of the committee will be aware, the Great Famine was a human tragedy of immense proportions, but was in no way a military event. This renders it different to the other major state ceremonial events referred to earlier. While the Commemoration Committee has considered this issue, the practice to date has been to continue with the standard approach to ceremonial events of including military elements. However, there were no such elements included in the 2015 ceremony presided over by Minister Heather Humphreys TD, when a no flags and no uniforms policy was adopted. Nevertheless, the commemoration was considered a great success. In the event that a host community, either north or south, wished to adopt a similar approach at a future date with a view to emphasising the humanitarian nature of the tragedy, the imposition of a legislative requirement as proposed would require amending legislation, even if the government of today was minded to accommodate an alternative approach to such ceremonies that did not encompass the military involvement. At any time, proposals that might inadvertently impact in a negative way on the capacity of any community on the island of Ireland to host an event of this nature would be a sensitive matter. In current circumstances, these sensitivities are particularly acute, and the Department would ask that the committee reflect carefully on this issue. The Department would also point out that there is no legal definition of the term interfaith service. As this is part of the community programme, we have seen a number of different approaches taken over the years. However, notwithstanding this, all the major faiths in the country have been invited to participate in the commemoration, as have the Humanist Society. The inclusion of a term such as this in legislation would require careful definition to avoid imposing a legislative requirement with which a minister perhaps could not with certainty comply. In addition, as Ireland becomes a more diverse country, including as a result of providing refuge to people fleeing often tragic events in their countries of origin, the Department would again request that the Committee reflect carefully on the prudence of reducing flexibility for host communities on this issue. In light of these concerns and above-mentioned possibility of wider implications for the wider state ceremonial calendar, the Minister would ask that the Committee, taking full account of the Government's decision of April 30th last year, give full consideration to the necessity of legislation for family commemoration at this time. And those key kind of concerns around moving the venue around from location to location, and also the issues around the military involvement or the military ceremonial event and the interfaith service. But I just to acknowledge what the Deputy said in relation to his own contribution about being willing to look at elements of the bill. I think that was very helpful to say.
Agus on Fianna Darnach, also car. I'd like to invite Mr. Michael Blanche to make his presentation, and then it'll be open to questions from deputies and senators.
Dear Gaeltacht Committee, Oireachtas members, Irish men and Irish women, home and abroad, and the children of Ireland. The Committee for the Commemoration of Irish Famine Victims, CCIFE, have over many years campaigned for and created a National Famine Memorial Day. CCIFE are a family, community-based group who, over the years, have links and close partnerships and friendships throughout the island, neighbouring Ireland and globally. The bill being discussed today at committee stage is another piece of the jigsaw in the gigantic picture that is on Gaeltacht. The bill will give stability, certainty, an equal footing and recognition with Easter, July Remembrance Days, who have fixed days. The Irish people, home and abroad, will know when the National Famine Memorial Day will take place when the bill is passed. It will also solve the annual headache for the Minister and the Committee. Like on St Patrick's Day, Ireland and the world turns green, as it will on the second or third Sunday, bill to be discussed, in May, when the National Famine Commemoration Day beds in and gets more known. The bill will have a major part to play in this. Ireland is unique. We're the only country in the world with a famine day in its national calendar that other countries would cherish to have without the pain and the loss. They will follow in support, solidarity and spirit with Ireland on Famine Day. As famine and hunger is still a blight and constant foe on humanity today in a world of plenty, the International Overseas National Famine Memorial Day can and should be held on the same day, the third or second Sunday in May, wherever the green is worn, like St Patrick's Day, one day. The bill allows the Taoiseach to select the location for the National Famine Commemoration Day, as can be done for the International Day. There is not a blade of grass, a sod of soil, a village, town or city that has escaped the scars and wounds of Gaeltacht. Selecting a location will not be a problem. Likewise, for the International Day, the Irish global famine family has left a large footprint and casts a long shadow on the planet, with over 100 famine memorials remembering those dark times, days and years in Irish history. With Brexit confusion reigning, the unifying cement of the National Famine Commemoration Day is an all-Ireland event crossing the border as in 2015 in Newry. CCIFE were the harbingers for this happening in 2014 when we placed the marker in a pauper's grave and a famine mass grave at the old Newry workhouse, today the Daisy Hill Hospital. The mass grave, as do numerous other mass graves on workhouse sites or very close to them around the country, hold the bodies of Catholic, Protestant, dissenter and non-believers, one mass of humanity sleeping peacefully side by side. This is the universality of the Great Hunger. The 2014 Newry commemoration was multi-denominational and cross-community. The Mayor of Newry officiated at the ceremony. Now people home and abroad are aware of the National Famine Commemoration Day, and like St Patrick's Day, communities are holding on Gaeltacht events all over Ireland and overseas. London and other UK locations have held commemorations for a number of years, as do America, Canada, Australia and other places that we are not aware of. The The core of the National Famine Commemoration Day is remembrance of over 1 million innocent victims and another 2 million forced into exile. The nuclear-like fallout is still felt today, more than 170 years on. Ireland is the only country in the world that our population has not grown since the 19th century, not a statistic any country would wish to hold. The positives are the 70 million Irish global famine family are proud to be Irish. If a small percentage wishing to trace their Irish family ancestry, heritage and history, which is very popular now, come to Ireland, the tourism potential, if harnessed and promoted, is potentially limitless revenue for the country, plus forging closer links with their adopted countries. There are 8 departments and NGOs who sit on the National Famine Commemoration Committee who can all contribute to planting the seed for future growth and promotion of the National Famine Commemoration Day, home and abroad. Education on the famine, which is only optionally taught in schools, although on the curriculum it is not compulsory. The CCIFE have the Lumper Schools project, which is on the Department's SchoolNet website this year for the first time, but the project is running for the past 5 years. The Lumper Schools project is sponsored by the Glens of Antrim's Potatoes and is an all-Ireland programme. The Lumper is a living artefact famine history teacher. When tourists, or indeed Irish people, especially school children, call into the National Museum of Ireland, there is not a plaque on a wall to recognise or honour the loss of so many in this important part of our history that changed Ireland and the world forever. On Gaeltacht gave the nation our national flag through the Young Irelander 1848 famine rebellion, led by William Smith O'Brien, at Ballingarry, the War House, now a national monument. The first time the tricolour flew in battle, it was the birth and creation of the IRB and the catalyst for the 1867 and the 1916 rebellions that gave us our independence. On Gaeltacht, buried like the victims in omission, silence and denial in the National Museum of Ireland since the state's foundation, coming up to the 100th birthday. The above CCIFE vision and opinions are lengthy but need to be considered. The below comments are condensed proposals for the amendments to the National Famine Commemoration Day 2017 bill. The rotation protocol around the 4 provinces to be sacrosanct, not to be broken, as was done this year, 2018, when the National Famine Commemoration Day was kept in Munster 2 years in succession at the expense of all 4 provinces to accommodate a cabinet meeting, a first for the university to hold one, and to launch a book online. The National Famine Commemoration Day is bigger than both. The National Famine Commemoration Day to be held on the 3rd or 2nd Sunday in May in conjunction with the one at home, to bring the Irish global family into unity and inclusion. In remembrance of the victims and in celebration of the exiles and survivors on the same day, 3rd or 2nd Sunday in May, Famine Day. On St Patrick's Day, home and abroad, the Irish global family unite as one on the same day, as should be done on the National Famine Commemoration Day, home and abroad. The doubt and uncertainty attached to both the home and international days' timing since inauguration in 2008 is finally consigned to history with the passing of this bill. The bill will bring clarity, certainty and stability for the Irish people and communities home and abroad who hold commemorations, and the Taoiseach and Minister and the National Famine Commemoration Committee can now plan years in advance. The bill is an important part of the holistic story and history of Gaeltacht. Good morning to the committee for giving CCIFE this opportunity for community involvement.
Michael, I'll now open it up to comments or questions. First indicating was Senator O'Donnell.
Thank you very much, and welcome, and delighted to hear what you have to say. I'm just very confused, Chair, and not because of what I've heard, but I'm confused really that the Minister of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht and the Government on the 30th of April 2018 agreed to the designation, agreed to it, and then I'm told that they're now questioning it in the sense there's an obfuscation given the heightened sensitivity of the North and issues in military, and so I don't know where I am. That's the first thing I'd like to ask TD Deputy is where are we? Does she agree with it or does she not agree with it? Or does she agree with it and then has sent it out here for us to find what the problems are or obfuscate the agreement? So that's the first question. The second question is why, give me specific reasons why you want it fixed. The third question is, what are the things that you would be tightening up, as you suggest? The fourth question is, that's to yourself, Deputy, to Conor Falvey from the Department. Do you agree with the bill? Okay, well, could you just answer that? And I liked your point about, Mr. Blanche, I liked your point about not corralling it to suit the suits. I liked that point, and I think what you say is very real. I said when I look at Yemen and I look at Syria, I think, my God, you know, where are we now that there's people starving and we're not even paying attention to them? But maybe you could answer, because I am confused as to, are we with the Minister? Is she with us? But not really, and has developed, you know, handed it all over as a kind of an obfuscation, or as an insurance policy, or what's going on, because I've read all the literature and I'm confused. And what started off as something quite simple, Deputy, has kind of taken a few tentacles to the right and the left of a bit of not so simple, which is why we're all here.
Okay, Senator. Deputy Brophy, first of all.
Thank you very much, Senator. I suppose let's to try and then bring it back to a nice simple approach to it. A little bit of a timeline, I think, might help on this. This bill has been around for a while. That's one of the problems within it. I think 2017 is effectively when the date of this. The government made a decision subsequent to the introduction of the bill. I'm inclined to think probably partly because the bill was there. My clear understanding and indication is the government allowed the bill to go forward, and the Minister has absolutely no problem with my bill. The indications are the small indications that I indicated to answer your other question of what I want to tighten up on. It's what was alluded to and mentioned by the Department. I have no problem with moving in the bill. It states the second Sunday. I have no problem with moving that date to the third Sunday. I have no problem with an amendment that would, instead of saying shall include civil and military, in changing that to can, to allow that flexibility if you were hosting it in a location where there would be a problem with a military involvement within it. So I have no problem with those type of changes. On the interfaith reference, what I'm trying to achieve in that reference there is that there is a strong interdenominational, interfaith-based part of it. How that can be achieved, I'm open to look at in terms of a wording. It's just really to ensure that that happens. In terms of allowing flexibility in terms of what takes place on the actual day, I think that's the type of thing that a committee should work out on a year-by-year basis, based with the local community. However, let's be absolutely blunt and call a spade a spade. It's not acceptable to have a randomly rotated date based on, as you use the expression, suiting the suits. I don't believe there's a community in Ireland that could suggest to the Government of Ireland, we'd like to hold St. Patrick's Day, but would you do us a favour and hold it in July? I mean, that's not an acceptable point. As far as I'm concerned. So I really welcome the fact that the government has indicated through the decision that this government has made that they will hold it on the third Sunday in May. However, the point I would make is in the absence of this bill going forward, that decision can be adjusted and changed, Chairperson, like that. A new cabinet can sit, a new government can sit, and you could be back to the old situation. So there's a little bit of an element which I was disappointed in terms of what the Department's comments were there of, you know, do we need this at all and can we not just leave it as it is? I don't want to have any disagreement really on this, but realistically, because of what has happened in the past, because of the fact that we have had a moving of the date to suit the diaries of the people who might be attending it, or to suit a group wanting to hold it, I think we need to underpin it in this instance by actually saying we will hold it on the third Sunday in May. I am absolutely open to the notion that it can be held on the eve of the third Sunday in May, again to facilitate. But I am not open to leaving the flexibility by not going ahead with this bill that you would be at the current situation whereby literally at a whim this could be adjusted again. And unfortunately, without this, that is exactly what can happen. There's no way you can argue that point. That is exactly what happens. Without the bill, without the copper fastening, which I've talked about, that's in the bill, it would be a simple process to change it. So they are the reasons why. They're the small specifics to indicate to you that I'm willing to change. I believe there is support from it. And I think there's very wide cross-party support right across both party and non-party members in the House in relation to this. So I would hope with the committee's assistance and examination today that we can progress this fairly quickly. I hope I've answered everything for you there.
Conor?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I suppose the quick answer to the question, Senator, is as drafted, no. The issue about whether or not and the government decision was certainly in the context of there being private members' legislation in circulation or being under consideration by the Oireachtas. I suppose the variation in terms of, just to explain it, between May and September, again, when you're dealing with host communities and you want to involve schools and the event is outside, there's a narrow window when you can be hopeful that the weather might be good enough, and then where the schools will be open so that school children can be involved in terms of the community element. There may be a local consideration why somewhere in May might say, actually, you know what, we have other stuff on in May, can we move it? And I appreciate that the Oireachtas members and people may have a view as to whether that's a good idea or not. I suppose the tendency has been to facilitate that. And the flip end of that was to go into September. And I suppose that was as much a driver, to the best of my knowledge, not having been involved in every single event that took place since 2008, which may not have taken place in May, as much as the availability of a particular person or whatever it might be. But there could be a community consideration. Having said that, the government was clearly convinced last April of the wisdom of settling on a date. But just to say, that's the basis upon which the entire state ceremonial and commemorative events take place. But ultimately, I suppose it's a matter for the Oireachtas to decide as to what legislation they're going to provide. But we can only ask, in doing so, that they would reflect on these various elements to see whether it's appropriate to legislate for them, if they consider that it is, just to have regard. And in fairness, the Deputy is acknowledging that, and that there may be issues, and that's a helpful contribution.
Chair, just to the Chair. So where are we, Mr Falvey?
So it's a private member's bill before the Oireachtas.
Yes, I know that. So to the Chair. So what happens now? There's an
the process is that we have to give what we're doing at the moment, this scrutiny, the detailed scrutiny. We will then send a message to the Dáil whether we believe that this bill should progress. If the Dáil agrees, then we come back in here with committee stage, which means amendments from kind of parties who are interested.
With or without the department's approval.
Well, that's our decision. We're the members.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find out.
And at that stage,
you've been on your phone.
At that stage, we also need a money message from the government, which was one of the points I was going to raise. But this is the type of bill that I can't foresee any major problem in terms of money, because it isn't an expenditure on that, but we can get that agreement. There's quite a lot of what's called private members' bill are stuck at various stages. This could be one of the bills. So sorry, I was just informed we have a money message on this, so which means that we can progress all the way to full legislation with the agreement of the members of the House.
Yes.
So this is one of the bills that you can progress from a private members if that's our decision, because we as a committee still have to make that decision. The reason you're here today is to explain the bill to us, to as Deputy Brophy and as the department have shown, where is the areas that we need to address and that you're open to address and whatnot. That also that the bill itself isn't fatally flawed, that it's not going to cause undue harm to something else, and I think in this case we're okay. So, Senator Warfield.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome to Deputy Brophy to the committee. and to Michael Blanche and all of the guests. I know Michael has campaigned tirelessly, and I know you met Conor in my office with Deputy Tóibín previously. This period, I won't say an awful lot about it. I'd rather just get into the detail of the bill and use my time for that. But it was obviously a catalyst for our influence around the world. And by 1850, we made up a quarter of the population of Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Buffalo, and Baltimore. And the influx of the Irish in these cities over only 5 years must have been a huge upheaval for those cities, but that they ultimately benefited the American societies. I think that teaches us our own lessons, hard lessons, when we consider our generosity and openness to fleeing and struggling peoples around the world. So this is an important holiday for so many reasons, and we could have that conversation all day long. I have no problem with legislating for this. I have no real interest in the department's concerns around legislating for this. I know it's not practice, but I have no problem with that. My preference would be for the title to be Oscailga across the bill, for the Ungurtha Mór to be the title and the language in the bill. I have no problem with the date or amending the date as the Oireachtas sees fit, but setting it, I believe that's the right call to make. Part 2, Section 3, around the civil and military ceremonial elements, my own preference would just be to remove that section there. The commemoration shall include civil and military elements and shall include an interfaith service. I would leave that up to the discretion of the department, and I would change Section 4 to be designated by the department, by the Minister for Culture. But they're my own personal opinions. Personally, I feel something uncomfortable about when there's such an interfaith element or a faith element at any ceremony, and most recently the presidential election, or the, what was it called? The inauguration, yeah. My own preference would be for no faiths to be there, but
that's the way it used to be. That's the way it used to be. That's only a new invention.
Oh, really?
Yep. And I agree with you.
Is there a reason why the Taoiseach should?
I'm quite happy to have that as the department.
That's the Minister for Culture,
the
yeah.
Thing. Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite happy to have that as the department.
Finally, you'll know about this issue well. We only have 9 public holidays. The standard across the EU is 11. No, I know that. I know that. But I wish to make the point that we only have 9 holidays. The EU average is 11. And will your government run with this and take ownership with it, and perhaps set a public holiday which might give a whole load of bring a whole lot of other benefit to the commemoration.
I actually have to say I'd have a reservation around that. I'm not saying that something could happen or would happen, but I would be very disappointed if the day of commemoration ending up as a public holiday, and you could see the exploitation of that public holiday in a way which I think could very quickly become something that we would not be proud of. I think something like that happens around Patrick's Day already, which a lot of us have regrets on. So I think at the heart of this, it's a day of commemoration. I'm not going into that public holiday space at all.
Any other comments on what W. Warfield?
So, I'm not as opposed to the interfaith element, Senator. I think that put it this way, it's something that I think should be part of it. I would take on board Deputy Ó Cuív's comment. I'm not so sure it wasn't historically part of inaugurations or whatever it developed, but I think in relation to this. But I would certainly and will be open if we get to the next stage at looking at a change in that section that allows greater flexibility in terms of the organisation as to how that's done. But it's not necessarily per se on having a problem with the fact that it's an interfaith. I wouldn't agree with you on the notion of not having any faith-based element to it. I think that you have to be respectful of people who have faith as much as you have to be respectful of people who have no faith. And I think the moving of the pendulum one way or the other too much is not the answer.
Professor Cook.
Thank you, Caherloch. Members and guests, thank you very much for inviting me here today. I've had the pleasure of being on the National Famine Commemoration Committee now for 9 years, and it's been a great honour for me. I've seen it evolve over those years. I suppose the three main thrusts of the National Famine Commemoration Committee is to facilitate the national commemoration and also the international commemoration. The second part of it is to reach out and try and engage the diaspora in whatever way we can. And thirdly is to make awareness of hunger issues, Senator, worldwide in whatever way we can. Part of the first part I'd just like to comment on, the national part. There has been huge community involvement. First of all, it rotates around the country to each province every year. And in the past, we used to have various towns within that province, if you like, sending in applications and competing to host it. But each community addressed it in different ways. And that was a big part, if you like, of the success of the commemoration within that community. The other two parts, I think probably we haven't been as successful in reaching out to the diaspora and making awareness of hunger issues worldwide. But I think that is on its way to being somewhat resolved with the development of a marvellous website. The website now has been developed by the department in conjunction with UCC, and it's a research tool where you can look at involvement. You can look at the involvement from 1841 to 1851 and the changes in demographics and various statistics over that period by just bringing a cursor across the screen. But that website can be developed, and my own vision for it, or sorry, I should say my own vision really, I suppose, alongside with members of the National Famine Commemoration, is that we could engage the diaspora in very innovative ways by developing the website as a repository, and that people worldwide could put in their own stories under a managed system, or put in photographs of artefacts and whatever, and engage the diaspora in that way. Also, the website is being used by schools. And in fact, I'd like to say that when we were starting to develop the website initially, there was a great interest from schools in Northern Ireland. They wanted to become involved. The other thing I'd just like to say, that a comment on the military elements. When we're talking about the North, obviously that can be an issue. And we need to we did involve the North, but it'll come around again, and you know, the Protestant community, Protestant famine communities in the North were equally as affected as many famine communities down south. The other thing too is, if I might just make a comment on the interfaith service. In some of the commemorations in the past, the interfaith service, bluntly, has gone on too long. And in some ways, you know, has disengaged people from the reflective event that's been organised with music, poetry, enactments and so on. And people, it's hard to get back into that zone again. So I'd be worried about prescribing an interfaith service as part of it. Thank you very much for that.
Cool, Margaret.
Were we still in my time?
Not really, but I'll let you in because it's been second time, and then it's Deputy Ó Cuív.
Yeah, just to be interested to get anyone's thoughts on the title, as I suggested, that we just run with the title as Gaeilge. And I just think it's a little bit outrageous for the deputy to suggest that if we allocate a public holiday, everyone will go on the piss. Like, we have
I'm sorry, Senator. Apart from your language, I didn't actually say that. I didn't actually say that. Sorry, Senator. I did not actually say that. Even in use of the choice of your own words there, which thing, I didn't say that in either way. You asked me, was I in favour of being a public holiday? I'm not, and for the reasons I've stated, I think it's more appropriate as a commemoration day. And in answer to your second question, in relation to the title, I think while An Gorta Mór is obviously correct, and both the Irish and the English are there, I don't think there is a problem in having both languages. This is an international day we want to build as well. We want things, so I don't want to get bogged down in that. I think we're losing this is unfortunately sometimes what can happen in terms of I want to have through this bill a very straightforward, simple bill that puts in place something that people have looked for a very long time, which at the heart of it, which is to lock the date to a particular day each year for a commemoration purpose. As I have said, I am very open at amendment stages to working to facilitate all the other aspects of it to be as inclusive as possible and take account of people's both experience in organising previous years and the practicalities of various things like the element of military or interfaith, etc. So I'm very open to that.
Okay, just before I let Dr. Ó Cuív in, all bills when they're passed by the Houses are in Irish and English, the title. And they're supposed to be, you can have it in Oscuaga Owan if that's the decision, but it would be translated. Dr. Ó Cuív.
As somebody who was intimately involved in this from the very beginning, I think the question that arises here today, how best to have a family commemoration. Nobody, to my knowledge, there's no movement in the state not to have a family commemoration. So I don't think there's any danger of any government saying we won't have it. So a much more fundamental question arises, and it always arises, is do you just do it? Or do you put it in legislation? And there are upsides and downsides to legislation. I often complain that European legislation can be awful constraining and can have all sorts of unintended consequences of extremism, interpretations by courts and so on, that were never, in my view, intended by the legislators. But the problem is when you go that far away and you put it into that kind of stone, without getting the whole of Europe to change it, but you can't move it. So it becomes immutable. And you find it becomes impractical. And we're finding that every day of the week, certainly west of the Shannon, with a lot of European legislation. Get absolutely bizarre consequences. Now, when you pass legislation in this House, if you find that there's an unintended consequence or an unforeseen circumstance, there's nothing you can do except go back and get another bit of legislation through. But if it's there by government decision and popular acclaim, then if there's a need for flexibility, you can go back at any time and change whatever you need to do. Now, I welcome that the government made a decision on the 3rd of May. I remember the debate the first time we started this because there was no obvious date, there was no rising, there was no one date. And we were, the first one was held, I think, at the end of May in Skibbereen. It was in the end of May in Skibbereen. And why we didn't nail down the date at that stage was very simple. That we were just wondering, had we forgotten something? Or was something going to pop out to say, hang on a second, there's a big row about this or something else going on at that time. We couldn't think of anything. I think it was held on a different date once, is that right? Well, outside of May, twice. And there were reasons. Now, here's the next question that arises, particularly as from the very beginning it was meant to be 32 county possibilities here. If the people of Belfast, Derry, wherever, came to you and said, look, we'd like to have it, it would be a bit insensitive to have it in May. We'd love to have it in September. And you said, sorry, the law says May, that's it. So I just wonder, do we need to nail this down in stone? Is there a big advantage? Is there a big risk if we don't? Or are we just constraining ourselves? Similarly, on the military part, I like the military part being there. For a very, very simple reason. The military, it's not guns or whatever our military play so far until we get involved in common defence in Europe. But until we do, our military is a force for peacekeeping and for internal state security. But it does represent the state in a very formal way. And therefore the idea when we discussed at the beginning of bringing the military in was to have to show that an independent Irish state recognised these citizens of ours who died in the famine. Now, that said, obviously across the border that poses difficulties. And again, we have to be flexible. I have to say, in relation to the religious service, I made a comment, I probably shouldn't have made it here, across the floor because you went to do everything through the chair and I hired it. I don't like the present arrangement for the inauguration. And if you check back to Douglas Hyde and subsequently, what used to happen is that they went to a service in the church of their choice. In the case of Douglas Hyde, if you check the record, it was in St. Patrick's. And anybody who didn't want to go to the religious service just skipped that because that was purely a religious service for the person of their religion to pray for the success of their presidency or whatever. But when it came down to the state ceremony, which is the inauguration, that is not the inauguration, it's nothing to do with the inauguration, it's a mass of, or a service or whatever you had, or a humanistic or whatever, whoever it would be, that it was off-site. But when it came to the inauguration proper, which only took place in St. Patrick's Hall, there was no religious element because there was a total separation of church and state. Now, we think we've moved forward. In my view, we've moved backwards by bringing all the religious into Dublin Castle, right? And having a queue of 30 or 40 different religions, and they're growing every year, and that's grand. I have no problem with that. I think all this is great. Different groups who go up and say some type, and I have to say I agree with Professor Cook after a while, you see the eyelids drop. So I don't think that should be in the bill. So when you start stripping the bill away to allow for our contingency, are you left with any bill? And do we really need a bill? And I think that's something the committee will have to decide. Now, where we would need a bill, and we'd need a bill very, very urgently, is if the government were half thinking of dropping all of this. But I don't think there's a snowball chance in hell of that happening. No, the elements, as I understand them, are you have the national commemoration in Ireland somewhere, preferably on the 3rd of May, and that date's been fixed by the Minister. Now, just, somebody mentioned Patrick's Day, if you move Patrick's Day. And yeah, there's a point. But of course, when you go to a lot of American cities, for very practical reasons, Patrick's Day isn't the Sunday before or the Sunday after, depending on how it falls, because they can't close all the streets to have a good, damn, decent parade on the 17th of March. So the world is funny, because the world is very rarely black and white, straight, what a law does for you, and that's why I think we should always be sparing in law. If we go to the religious, I've made my view on it. If we go to the military, I've made my view on that. Yes, I want it in all the national ones, but then suddenly I find I've been to write in a whole lot more clauses to say, but in the event of it having a northern element or any other sensitivities like that, you have to leave it out. So I'm wondering what's going to be in the bill in the end. So I think this is what we as a committee have to look at. But I would like an absolute affirmation from the department. You had the national. You had the international commemoration. Now, to me, I remember we went and we did it in Toronto and Gros Isle. And I have to say, Gros Isle was absolutely extraordinary. The island where all the immigrants came through on the way into Canada. An extraordinary place anyway. I was a little bit amused at the, I have to say I can't not mention the monument, the extraordinary monument, I think it's in Cloughevet, that they built, and they brought the stone 60 years later down the St. Lawrence River, 300 miles, to raise this absolutely extraordinary cross. What also is interesting about it is that some of the people who come in were so poor, they had nothing, were involved in raising the monument 60 years later. It just shows the ability of the Irish to rise from nothing. But what was interesting is there's an inscription on the monument in Irish, English and French. And they translate the Irish version, but they translate it wrongly. And there was a secret code in the Irish version, if anyone looks at the Irish version, because on the bottom of it says, Gosera dia Eide, and people translate that as God Save Ireland. It's not what it's saying at all. It says, may God free Ireland. And obviously they had huge aspirations, the people who raised the cross, the ex-famine victims, in a political sense, but they decided to keep that to themselves. So it's only written in Irish, it's not written in English or French, which I thought was very, very curious, but it's there, and it's a very stark message of their political dreams. And again, it goes back to what I said about the military ceremony. To me, it very much epitomises the aspirations of those people, even in the most desperate of times, that they would have control of their own destinies. I think we have a difficult choice to make. I don't think it's anything to do with the famine commemoration, because you had that. There was also a lecture, I don't know if that has continued. There was a lecture that was delivered abroad, and there was talk of a lecture here in Ireland as part of it. I'm glad to hear the website. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I think the committee does a great job as a voluntary committee. I don't like the word to suit the suits. I think the people we have to suit are the communities. And as I said, it's the All-Ireland dimension that makes it a little trickier. Because I think we should try, when we go to Ulster, to make sure that the whole 9 counties are in on the bid, not just 3 counties. Can I finally say, I thought it was a bad precedent. I was bitterly disappointed when it was decided not to continue the rotation. I was assured by the department I was intended to return to that. I still think it was a mistake. I don't care what bid UCC put in, I actually think it was a major, major mistake. And the other thing is this. When we set it up, the famine belonged to the people. It belongs to the small places of Ireland, to the Murrocks, the Skibbereen, and that's why we started in Skibbereen. It belongs to the people in every part, in the smallest rural communities were heavily populated in those times. Some places are totally depopulated, were heavily populated and hugely affected. I would hope that the committee would resist the temptation to become, to the most powerful communities, the biggest towns, the cities grabbing this. Because this was the one national commemoration that went to every community, because every community was affected, and some, as I said, very, very rural. We know about the famine village and the likes of Achill. I can see a great reason to have it in Achill. And one thing we found was when we brought it to the rural areas, to those areas where it really was close, the memories were still there, the folk memories were there, which they obviously last in a less moving population, that the enthusiasm for organising on a local level was absolutely compensated for any lack of population. I have an open mind on this, and I think we should keep an open mind until we have a private debate about it.
Margaret, Michael Erdous.
I'd like to correct the record here. The Dáil record is the primary source of the first inaugural National Famine Memorial Day. Was the Custom House in Dublin in 2008, with a community-based involvement. Now, Deputy Ó Cuív, because you were absent does not mean it did not take place. John Curran, Deputy Curran, who stepped in for you, because you were absent. Now, leading on to what the department say, they will say that to have a community involvement was the purpose of why they excluded or tried to erase the Custom House in 2008, the inaugural one. The CCIFE, when the Taoiseach stood up on the Dáil on the 21st of May and said it was happening with a community event that day, CCIFE, he didn't mention CCIFE, he said community group. Now, when the department say this as an excuse or a pretext, in 2016, in Glasnevin Cemetery, there was a 6 weeks notice to the people of Ireland by the committee, National Family Commemoration Committee. There was no community involvement. Do we have to expunge that 2016 commemoration? There was 6 weeks notice. The Dáil was on holidays, and the schools, I think they were only back a week, so that's how the schools and community were not involved in Glasnevin. So it's either we expunge Glasnevin out of the National Famine Commemoration as regards the criteria by the department, or we start setting the record right from now, today, in this Oireachtas Joint Committee. Because if you go to the primary source, as I say, the Taoiseach, Dáil record, and the event happened in the Custom House in 2008, and it wasn't a figment of our imagination or my imagination, because I was there.
I think that's accepted, that Deputy Ó Cuív said he stood corrected. Did anybody else?
Can I just comment on just a couple of things Deputy Ó Cuív said? You know, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot more agreement. I think you can look for disagreement in this. There's a lot more agreement in it. At the heart of it, really, I suppose, for me, comes down to this, and it shouldn't be a competing set of priorities. It should be something that's worked together. I would accept totally that the heart of the event should be communities. I actually agree with you that it works much better, I think, outside of major urban centres and in smaller communities. I think that from the ones I have attended, I would certainly agree. I think that is, it works far better. But I suppose what it does come down to me on is this, that we're commemorating the most important event in what formed modern Ireland, the island of Ireland. And whether or not you believe that that is worth overriding considerations in terms of fixing a date and not building flexibility around it. And to me it does. And I fully accept that you can try and envisage some scenario where some community says we can't do a particular date, but I'm really sorry for the millions that died, for the millions of families in this country who lost people through emigration. I think we owe it to actually put a priority and say, well, do you know what, this is the date. Because I don't buy the argument about, well, you know, in America they move St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, they might, but they don't move July 4th. And they don't move Thanksgiving. And it says something about a country, what it decides that it will lock and what it will decide will be a sacred date to it, whether it's Armistice Day or whatever it is. So that, to me, was what drove this. And as I say, I don't, in lots of ways, you'd like to think it wasn't necessary to have this piece of legislation. But unfortunately, while we had a very good initial start in terms of work done by Deputy Ó Cuív in bringing about the famine commemoration, and by a lot of other people as well, obviously, including Michael and his group, I think this is just a very small step, and I don't think it's over-prescriptive. And as I said, on the smaller technical points, I'm absolutely willing to work with the committee and other members of the House and the Seanad to just make sure that we have a bill that can garner full support.
Can I just ask a question, one final question? Just called to pull the bill up here, so you're saying we'll have it. Well, I don't think anybody's disputing that. Second thing you're saying is second to understand you're agreeable to the third. That's fine. Then you have the military and the interfaith service. personally have problems with that. And then it says the central venue for the commemoration shall be designated by the Taoiseach. Now, the problem I have with that is, technically speaking, the Taoiseach could decide what he wanted, or the Minister, if you replace the Taoiseach by the Minister. Whereas the whole way this was designed from the beginning was it was an advisory committee. And in principle and in practice, at no way was it ever envisaged that anything would be decided without the advisory committee, because the Minister chaired that. Now, I think if you're going to draw up a bill, I'd suggest that you will consider putting the advisory committee in so that it be on the advice of the advisory committee. Because technically, according to your bill, you could actually destroy what's there, take out the advisory committee, and the Minister could, the Taoiseach, according to this, could just designate to take. But even if you take it out, it could be the Minister. And there's no mention that the Minister would have to seek advice of the advisory committee. And I think at the very least that that's actually the key element of how the decisions were made. Was it wasn't made by somebody just unilaterally in an office deciding, it was made by an advisory committee. There was very broad ranging of famine interest, current day famine interest, Troika, Gorta and so on, experts, and obviously people from the various departments. So, you know, the one key element of it, as I would have seen it, is actually missing from the bill.
I think the key element is in the bill, but I'm absolutely open, Deputy, to looking at how to make it as inclusive as possible so as it meets members' requirements in areas like that.
We'll be open when it comes back at committee stage for all members.
But the problem is we can't put in an amendment to that effect because it will be burden on the Exchequer.
It depends how you write it. I've succeeded in the past. Is there anybody from the department?
Just a couple of elements. Maybe just acknowledge everybody in the room and to say, you know, and the bona fides of everybody here in terms of their interest in and commitment in this issue is very welcome, just from the department's perspective, and to have that interest. I had the absolute privilege of accompanying Minister Patrick O'Donovan to Melbourne, Australia, for the International Famine Commemoration in October at Williamstown, where some of the great-grandchildren of the orphan girls who went out in the Earl Grey ships in the late 1840s and 1850 laid reeds at the memorial stone, and a message from Michael was read out at that event, and it was a much more moving and emotional event than I anticipated when I was going. And there was an academic roundtable that followed on from that, facilitated by chairs and professors of Irish studies in various universities, and that was there was a standing room only event in Australia, and again a very emotional event for all of the people who were there, both about the famine event and then for people who were more recent immigrants about the immigrant experience for Irish people in Australia. It provided a forum for that I think people were looking for. In terms of the locations for events, I can only say that the rotation, on the advice of the view of the committee, as I understand it, is back fully, and the part of this year was a one-off. But you made your views known on that on a number of occasions. Just to say that the website, to which was referenced by Professor Cook earlier, tells that story about the impact of the famine very clearly in a graphic fashion. So you can see the people in the worst classes of accommodation in rural areas engaged in agriculture, the absolute destruction of those communities, and the way in which towns which did exist before the war and communities are before the famine are gone by 1851. So just to say, if there was any interest to the committee, we could ask UCC maybe to facilitate a demonstration at some stage if it was of any interest to members. But to come back to the basic point, there is a government decision in place in relation to the holding of the event on a specified weekend now. I know that the point has been made that can move, and I suppose anything is possible, but government decisions by their nature, they change them very quickly because they have less weight and magnitude then as a result. And there is no intention to dilute any of the supports that are in place at present for famine commemoration.
Margaret, I just wanted to ask a few questions myself, but first of all I want to thank Michael Blanche in particular, who has been dogged in this, kind of to the extent sometimes there's a what now? And in fairness, it's brilliant when you have something that comes from kind of the grassroots up, and kind of the logic is there. Kind of, I don't think anybody disputes the logic that Michael has kind of reminded us time in and time again, and when kind of other things we thought were too important kind of came across our desk, Michael was there to ring us up and to remind us. One of the questions in relation to the website is the lumper project that Michael kind of initiated as well. Can that be kind of a link to that? Because it's on, I know, the Department of Education site, but that be linked into the sites that's there, because it gives the history and it explains kind of how the planting and that is done subsequent. It's an area of history that I'm very interested in, but in particular in terms of commemorations, I think one of the keys, and I agree with this piece of legislation, there's two private members' bill, which is very strange, kind of that one man managed to get two different TDs and different parties to produce bills at the same time or around the same time. But I think the key is that this date is fixed, and the only way of fixing dates thus far has been to tie them to a bank holiday. I'm not going to go down this argument. I have my own views. I have my own piece of legislation in terms of an Independence Day. So I'm not going to delay a bill by adding to it and having that debate. I'll have my own debate on that in the future. So this piece of legislation having a fixed date kind of, I think, also serves the purpose that a national holiday or a public holiday or a bank holiday has, because it's fixed in time, whether it's the Saturday, Friday, Sunday, Monday, but that we know which week. I think also to allow for no confusion, that the date is announced, or the venue is announced, not the date, the venue is announced at the conclusion of the commemoration that's had. So I think that would be useful, because that allows the communities to put in their bid and allows the committee to have its role and to announce, if at all possible. But I can't see how, if you're planning basically an international event, because that's what it is, even though it's in Ireland itself, I think it would be important. In terms of the schools project and community project, the only problem with the date is that you won't get secondary schools involved, because the third Saturday is kind of when most secondary school pupils are doing their exams, or those that aren't are facing their junior cert or leaving cert. But I know some of them will, because it's on their curriculum. If it's in your locality, in your small rural town, I can guarantee you'll be there, because it could be the biggest event in your lifetime if it's done properly, as it has been. It highlights the problem that we have, is that history has been removed slowly from and we come back to that another day.
You're right there, good chair.
Yeah.
Against that.
Oh no, I know, and we had the argument, but we didn't. They're reviewing it again, thank God, and hopefully they'll come out on the right side. But the schools programme, I think, is key. That it's not just in the province that is right across the board. It's on the curriculum. In terms of the military service, I'm agnostic about that. I think it adds to some events. It detracts in other ways. In terms of the interfaith and that, I think, if you want, that all events that are run by the state be non-sectarian. And that allows you either to have a religious one, but if you go down that road, you have to represent all the religions. The easiest way is not to have any. And as Peadar Tóibín, you can have in a church or a hall or something, an event prior to it, if that's what the community wants. I think is there anything else? I agree with Peadar Tóibín in terms of making sure that the community and the committee, the commemoration committee, be somewhere mentioned, so that it's not just the minister. So maybe that the Taoiseach is announcing the date on foot of a report from the committee, And that covers it then, because then you suggest that the committee exists. So I think there's a lot of the talk today. I feel amendments coming on, but they are not against the spirit of the bill, and I think the spirit of the bill has been reflected here today. So if somebody wants to respond to my ramblings there, feel free.
Well, just to say, I thought you did a very good job encapsulating it. I think there's no problem with amendments. The spirit of the bill, as you say, is there, and I think there was a very good exchange today, including what you've just outlined, Caherlock, that we can work with to progress it if you're after your committee make their decision if they're going.
Just one thing, and it's just a practical consideration. As a suggestion, we come from a number of quarters about potentially putting the committee on some kind of statutory footing. Just from a complexity point of view, the department hasn't given any consideration to what that might involve. So it's just to point that out. It just could add a little bit of time into trying to figure out how we might do that in a way that reflects the wish of the Oireachtas. But
if you don't put it on statutory footing, you'll actually, to a certain extent, taking the power away from the committee. That's de facto there at the moment, because nobody dreamed to do without it. And just saying the Minister, the Minister can make a decision on it when it actually send the teacher committee taking a decision, good luck. And no mention of any consultation with anybody.
We could have this debate maybe at the committee stage if an amendment is put down, but it allows the department, in some ways we're putting down, no, there may be, and maybe not, and then we can, if the department has a compelling case, then we can.
Through the chair, you see, one of the problem.
Can I make a point before since Deputy Ó Cuív was speaking for quite a long time. Can I just say, I was very taken with what you had to say, Professor Cook, about how the interfaith has taken over now to the point of where artistry gets left behind. And I just wondered if the whole area of artistic, creative, literary, historical aspects of this could not be incorporated somewhere in the bill, that could be, a grounding, that if that could be somewhere, because that's the thing that brings it alive. And I completely agree with Deputy Ó Cuív, which is rare, but I completely agree with them on the grounds of the military, because for me they bring such respect and honour to this country as a republic, and I'm very proud when I see them, and if anybody had moved the 1916 celebrations, commemorations on, it was our military. It was brilliantly done, and there's such manners and respect and grace for who and what we are, and can communicate it so well. So maybe that could be a part of it, because I'm in agreement with you, and it's just to get it right. I have to go, because without it, without my vote, the government might fall.
I suggest you definitely go, Senator.
You can lock those doors. Okay. Yeah.
There's another bill before the House to do with trial and voting, and I'm in discussions with the department, and for the very technical reason of money messages, we discussed them. There's no big difference between me and the department on the amendments, because they were recommended by the committee. So they're bringing them forward, because if they do that, the money message issue, if the Minister brings it forward, the money message issue doesn't arise. So I certainly think if you're going ahead with this bill, you have to put the committee in some form or some consultation process. You can't just have a bald statement. Like, it's crazy. We're doing this to make things better, and then we take out any consultation with anybody, and the Minister just actually the decision according to your bill. Fix the date, that's it. And I would like to see, before we go further consideration, if the Deputy, in consultation with the department, have draft heads of amendments that they can bring forward to us to deal with those issues, because otherwise I think the bill is highly flawed.
As I say, I'm willing to look at what amendments that I consider appropriate and right, and it's up to you as a committee to decide whether you are going to give us.
Sorry, but you see, what I'm saying is I'm suggesting you talk to your Minister, Madigan, on the basis that if you bring it forward, we're all around the mountain to the money message issue. If we bring it forward, we're caught in the same thing. But if they bring it forward and agree them with you, and she brings it forward, she doesn't face any such technical difficulties.
Yeah. Well, I think we can work out a solution on how to do that.
Okay. So, Thomas, Craig, Allam Mabwicus a Gaeltacht in a Glockpart, then talk to Colin Brophy, then a Honda Hone Ryan, John Healy, Conor Falvey, agus on Tullov, Tony Cook, agus an son Choma, on Vertella Michael, agus Olivia Blanche, as an Quidu a Hogsheet, and Costianov. The meeting is adjourned until Wednesday, the 13th of December at 1:30.